Hello and welcome to Birth of a New Dimension. My name is Aurora. I will be speaking to you today all about concepts of higher dimensionality. So the first thing is provenance. This is a question of who am I and where does my information come from? This is an appropriate question for you to ask. So I am a galactic walk-in. I put those two words together in order to give the impression of a being who is not the original occupant of this physical body. I came into this physical body when it was age 27. After the previous occupant, the temporal ego that was in this body was destroyed and unmade, and the physical body had its life processes temporarily stopped. And then I, as a non-terrestrial presence, came into this body. And in order to do so, first of all, the vibration or quality of the physical cellular structure of this body had to be changed in order to accommodate a new and different way of being. So I'm diving right in here. The new way of being is called the flying rainbow lasagna. Apparently there might be some difficulties accessing the Facebook feed. However, if you can, please click on the links that are at the left of the UCY FRL homepage. This will bring you to the Facebook Birth of a New Dimension feed page, where you should be able to click on images of my artwork. That will be explanatory. And also, I posted a link about DNA supercoiling. If you're unable to go through that long expository explanation of where to find the link, I'll describe the video to you. Supercoiling is when we take DNA in its two-stranded format and begin to twist it and twist it and twist it, just the same way that you make yarn out of separate wool fibers. And as the yarn becomes twisted and twisted and twisted, more and more potential energy is stored in those twistings, and it begins to coil back in on itself. This is called supercoiling. If you supercoil DNA enough, it turns into a tightly coiled X-shaped chromosome. Along the way to that shape, DNA makes itself into beautiful stacked tori. Tori is the plural form of torus. Torus means a donut. So there are all sorts of different shapes of donut depending upon how large the inner hole is and what are the proportions of the inner hole to the, let's say, the cake part of the donut hole versus cake. However, all you need to understand is that your DNA in its present format is based upon the torus, and your energy field, the field of non-physical energy surrounding your physical body and interpenetrating your physical body. If you click on those Facebook pages, you will see images of my paintings. I like to say that 6 days of the week I paint with my paintbrush. I'm an artist. I'm very visually oriented, but 1 day of the week I paint a painting with my voice here on the radio. So first of all, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for voluntarily subjecting yourself to the vibrations of my moving mouth parts, because this also has to do with consensual sharing of information. Aurora, provenance. Where did you come from and why did you come here? I came from a non-physical, higher dimensional world, and I came through a portal called the Flying Rainbow Lasagna, and the purpose of this is to bring a new tool, to teach or describe a new tool, or if you can imagine your DNA as being like dancing, I am bringing a new dance step for your DNA. So as I have stated before, during a certain portion of the cell lifespan, the nucleus is preparing for mitosis or cell division, and it makes the DNA tightly coiled into X-shaped chromosomes. However, that is only a tiny sliver of the cell's life. For most of the cell's existence, the DNA is completely unfurled, like the yarn of a sweater being pulled apart, so that you just see one giant long string. And when this is occurring in the nucleus of the cell, it's called chromatin. So your chromosomes become unfurled, and it creates just a big blob of stuff. And that is the DNA library of your body. So RNA messengers are able to go across the nuclear membrane into the cell nucleus and access those aspects of your DNA that have become unfurled. Not all pages in the books of the library of your DNA are accessible. Some of them are tightly coiled up. The information that is tightly coiled up is not accessible to the RNA messengers. The information that is unfurled is easily accessible, just like pages that are spread open and that you can read or peruse with your eyes. So this is the concept of epigenetics. Getting away from genetic fatalism. When DNA was first discovered, humans, with a great deal of simple understanding, said, this is written in stone, these are the building blocks of my life, this is where all of my diseases come from, and it's inescapable. This is called genetic fatalism. However, with more sophisticated understanding, humans have become, or Earth's surface humans have become able to perceive that DNA is ruled by a code. So epigenetics means the code that rules the code. DNA or genetics is the code of your proteins and functioning of your body, but that's just science's limited understanding of it. I will tell you that DNA is also the integument between the world of pure light and consciousness and possible events and the world of hard-edged reality with actual physical events, opportunities, and objects that you can touch with your body. DNA is that portal to manifestation. And I have just told you that I came into this realm, this third-dimensional realm, submerged in time in the fourth dimension, and we'll talk more about the dimensions, through a hyperdimensional portal that I created called the Flying Rainbow Lasagna. So the Flying Rainbow Lasagna is a hyper-torus. What cube is to tesseract, torus is to Flying Rainbow Lasagna. Do you speak math? If you do not speak math, that might be a non-understandable statement. I am making an analogy. I'm making a template for analogy. So if you know what a cube is, I think you do. You live inside of one. It's called the third dimension. It's a box. If you take that box and you place it into the next highest dimension, which is the fourth dimension, you get a type of moving box. There's lots of good videos and animations of it. I don't have anything linked up with it, but a simple Google search will give you tesseract. Essentially, it is the understanding that an object of the fourth dimension is a moving object. It is submerged in time and will get into the higher dimensions. So the torus is a donut. When we place that torus into a higher dimensional state, it is moving. And the shape that it makes when it is moving is called the Flying Rainbow Lasagna. The significance of this movement is that it dissolves boundaries. In much the same way that ingesting a psychedelic substance gives the user or ingester an experience of dissolved boundaries. No longer is there a difference between you as the individual and the environment or the context within which you are submerged. Under the influence of some psychedelic, hallucinogens, the sense of self dissolves, and there is merely a seamless continuum. If you could imagine, like right now, I'm sitting in my beautiful garden on a sunny day, so that's a good image for you to understand, but I am sitting in a little chair. But if you could imagine sitting directly on the earth, with absolutely no distinction being made between the Earth's surface and the mycelium and the microbes that cover her skin, and then the yeasts and mycelium and microbes that cover your own skin, and the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and how that atmosphere then flows into the surrounding plants around you. Basically, when the rational, conscious, verbalized mind is temporarily turned off, when we press pause on that level of consciousness, humans are able to access a more numinous consciousness, which I would even state is your true mind. The mind that is the mind created by your ego is a sense of being separated from your environment. It's a valuable stage of development to go through that most beings go through in early infancy and childhood, determining what is me and what is not me. If I touch my face, I can feel it. If I scratch my face, I can feel it. If I touch this chair, I don't feel it. If I scratch this chair, I don't feel it. These are essential lessons for just learning about the physical world, me versus not me, because in the end, you and your neurology care a lot more about you than about not you. Or another way of saying it is, it's okay to stab a head of cabbage with a knife because you don't feel it. It's not okay to stab your own leg with a knife because you feel it. However, it must be understood that these boundaries are arbitrary distinctions that have been created simply for a purpose so that you can navigate reality, and that it is very effective at other times to dissolve these boundaries so that two seemingly disparate realms can now communicate. So, the Flying Rainbow Lasagna is a tool for dissolving boundaries, or a way of making what is on one side of a membrane communicate with what is on the other side of a membrane without cutting that membrane. And that's an important distinction to make because we're talking about hyperdimensional reality. It's kind of like a theoretical realm. It is not necessarily the experienced realm of hard-edged objects. However, there are rules there about what you are and aren't allowed to do. It's very much like building a puzzle, like building a Jenga puzzle, or working with the Tetris, the old computer game Tetris. It is about structural integrity. So what is happening in the realm of hyperspace is a question of shapes, the way shapes fit together, the way energy flows, and do the shapes and the energy as it flows have structural integrity. This is like saying, is it grammatical within the syntax of the language of color, line, shape, form, movement, texture, and tone? This is what formerly would be known as sacred geometry, but I really want to bring up a much more impeccable language to describe this. Geometry literally means measuring Earth, and when we are speaking about hyperspace, we are not speaking about the terrestrial Earth plane of the third dimension experiencing the fourth dimension. We're speaking about a purely abstract realm. And this is important because I want to teach everyone about how beings that live in a purely abstract realm are abstractions. They are not anthropomorphic. They are not humanoid. If you perceive an abstraction through your anthropomorphic filter, it might appear humanoid, but you, as the perceiver, need to be sophisticated enough to understand that you are projecting your own limitations upon the thing that you are perceiving. So, in much the same way that when people see something new for the first time, they often cannot just perceive it in its raw form. People often have to associate what they perceive that is new with something that is already familiar. The cognitive leap is too great otherwise. So when people see something that is purely abstract, when they perceive an extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional consciousness, it might be too otherworldly for them to even understand that it is an entity, and so they might have to anthropomorphize it in order to be able to grasp it and understand it. Like if you look at a mountain, can you just talk to it and have a conversation with the mountain as a giant vibrating mineral? Or do you need to see a face on the mountain and see the rocks look kind of like two eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and then you are able to have a conversation with the mountain? So this is an important distinction because we are preparing for birth of a new dimension. This is the coming together of many divergent dimensions and the consciousnesses and entities that exist within those dimensions. So back to the idea of provenance. Where do I get my understanding from? So first of all, I have this understanding because I perceive through direct perception. That means I have an aperture in the middle of my forehead, my third eye, which emanates from my pineal gland but is not interchangeable with my pineal gland. And I also have a connection to source through my crown chakra. And the interplay of these two chakras that actually exist at perpendicular angles creates a gyrostabilizing effect, just like the rotors and spinning blades of a helicopter, that help my consciousness to steer and navigate the seas of awareness or the seas of consciousness. The non-physical realm is very much like an ocean, but the ocean is an ocean of waveforms, energy that is flowing. So in order to successfully navigate this ocean, what you need to do is create a sense of coherence. What does coherence mean? It doesn't just mean words that make sense. It means light waves that move in unison. So a laser beam is coherent light. All of the peaks and all of the troughs of the waves of a beam of light that is a laser light are organized, and they go in unison like soldiers that all step on the same foot at once, as opposed to regular light where the light is going in every direction, randomly hither, thither, and yon, and bumping into each other, like a bunch of people walking randomly at a party, not like soldiers moving in formation. So when you organize your light body through the process of refining your consciousness, through the daily experience of being submerged in time, you are creating a coherent light body, a light body that will stay together in its form, even when it is submerged within the ocean of consciousness. And this has to do with dissolving boundaries. Because if I say you are a collection of molecules, like water, and I take your water molecules and I submerge it within a larger tank of water, it is water molecules within water molecules. And this is the idea of traveling on the network of consciousness that is the sun and the stars and the galactic center. When you connect to the sun, first of all, sun gazing is the preliminary, like the exercises that lead up to using the sun as a portal for consciousness. When you actually go through the sun as a stargate, or any star as a stargate, it is like you as a separated, individuated consciousness, or, water molecules, are being submerged within a much larger ocean of consciousness. And if you did not have coherence, first of all, you would be unmade. And this is what happens when the ego reaches the membrane of death. The ego, the temporal sense of self, does not have coherence. So it is a non-stabilized form. If you can imagine a polygon or a polyhedron, a multi-sided shape that is not built symmetrically and is not built very well, and as soon as you subject it to these immense rolling forces, kind of like ocean waves, but again, we're not being literal, we're being figurative and poetic in our understanding here, that this is a non-physical realm of abstraction where energy flows, and if you are not coherent in your waves, the energy will literally break you apart into many, many pieces. You will be unmade and recycled back to the beginning and assembled into a new, slightly different format and try it all again. And these are the multiple iterations of self. Breaking apart, coming back together, reassembling, trying it again. This is the refinery of consciousness. And each one of us goes through the refinery millions of times within each corporeal existence until you achieve the alignment that aligns your consciousness with the one exit out of this realm or quantum. So in the world of subatomic particles, the electrons live in shells surrounding the nucleus, but those shells are dictated by quanta, meaning whole integers, packets that cannot be subdivided. So we live within a realm that is analogous to an electron shell. And in order for us to exit this realm, we have to make the cognitive leap, or the consciousness leap into the next higher dimension. And it is not a leap that can be made in increments. It is not something where we can go 1, 1.5, 1 3/4, 2. We have to go like electrons go, from the shell of lower excitation directly to the shell of higher excitation. And we do that through ascension. Dun, 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 dun. Let's talk about this, because we have to define terms. In the world of New Age writings and videos and blogging, in the blogosphere, so many people speak about ascension, but their language is not impeccable. So let's talk about ascension, and let's talk about building the higher dimensions. And if you need to know how I know about this and where my information comes from, and that's an appropriate question, the answer is I know about this because I perceive it with my own inner eye, and I am able to understand what I perceive and translate it into verbalized language, but mostly into paintings and sculptures and animations in order to share. So I do not have this information by reading it from a book secondhand or hearing it from a guru or a teacher who said to me, this is the way the world is structured. I have this from, like, if you want to know what microbes look like, you dig up some soil and put it under a microscope and look at them. And I have done the equivalent. I wanted to know about how consciousness is structured, so I looked at the structure of my own non-physical being, utilizing my third eye, which is like your microscope telescope, and this is what I perceived. And so it is also like saying to each one of us, you do not have to take my word for it. Please use your own inner eye, focus within, and find this truth in your own way. And for you, it might be expressed as tone, as music. For many people, they understand harmonics and the structure of consciousness as musical tones. Because I am very visually oriented, I understand it as being visual shapes, polygons, and colors. So I invite each one of us to develop our own system of interpretation. But the point is, I saw it firsthand, and then I draw a picture of it and speak to you about it. So, ascension. Ascension is necessary because we have been placed in a down position from where we are supposed to be. We need to climb up the ladder because we have descended the ladder. So what is this all about? This is about the degradation of the human code. I spoke earlier about how your genes are supercoiled into a chromosome shape, and your genes are ordinarily vibrating in a particular dance pattern. It's a dance pattern that has been limiting your consciousness for a very long time. And the limits are not only in what information you have available to you, but let's say your emotional palette, the emotions that are available to you. However, let's say if you have a book, but you can take the pages of that book and the words on those pages and you can rearrange them. And theoretically, then you could take any book and rearrange it to say what you really wish to say. This is getting away from the genetic fatalism that says, my genes are written in this way and I have to read the book as it is written. So the Flying Rainbow Lasagna is my contribution. I give it to you freely. I'm even here as my mission to tell you that it exists, teach you how to understand it and employ it in your own life. Like, far from being proprietary and secretive and trying to keep it away from everyone, I'm actually jumping up and down with my hand in the air saying, here is something really great that I found, that I created, that you can use too. So this is another important thing to understand. This is open source code for your DNA. This is not a dance step that I am the only person doing this dance. This is a dance that everyone is invited to join, to transform your toruses, your tori, into the shape of a flying rainbow lasagna by adding another dimension. So let's talk about building the dimensions and use impeccable language. If you listen to my show on a weekly basis, and if this is repetitive, please forgive me. However, we learn through repetition, and it's such an important point, I have to keep bringing it up. So many people in the blogosphere speak about the fifth dimension, and I love that band from the 1960s, and the fifth dimension is what it was called, and they sang that song, The Dawning of the Age of Aquarius. However, the fifth dimension is not merely a catch-all phrase for higher dimensional worlds and the beings that live there. And when you're not informed, it makes you easily misled. So I'm trying to say that humans that do not know how higher dimensional hyperspace is structured can be easily misled by beings that come to them and say, I'm a higher dimensional being from the fifth dimension. And it turns out that they're actually imposters and that they're playing upon your ignorance. So Understanding the structure of consciousness is empowering. It is a good thing. It's also part of preparing for the birth of a new dimension as we come together with otherworldly, other dimensional partners. And it's also part of your own process of individual maturation. When we are young, when we're little children, we are ignorant. We don't know how the world really works. And it's very easy for an older child or a bully or a sibling or even an adult to manipulate our consciousness through our ignorance. So as you get older and wiser, you learn and you say, that sounds like a pile of hooey. That's not true at all. So when I read someone speaking about beings of the fifth dimension, sometimes I say, that sounds like a pile of hooey. And now I'm going to give you the tools that you can use in order to understand what is really being spoken about. Beginning with the 0th dimension. It is 0 because it does not require any amount of information to describe its position. It is the presence of everything. It's infinity. It's both the source and the destination. So it is the presence of all energy, of all matter, and it is analogous to the super dense thimble full of matter and energy that science surmises and asks you to imagine existed before science surmises the Big Bang event occurred, okay? We're talking about everything squashed down into one tiny little spot. And the major leap of consciousness was when that everythingness had to one day think, what would it be like if some little part of me wasn't here? There wasn't any place else. There was no place elseness. So even to have the idea to say, well, this is the totality, what would it be like if there was something else other than the totality? This is me. What would it be like if there was not me? That is the crucial cognitive leap, the quantum leap that was necessary for the 0th dimension to blossom forward into the first dimension. The first dimension is a line. If you can imagine, you're standing in one spot, and where your footprints are, that's the 0th dimension, and there was nothing outside of your footprints. Now imagine taking one little baby step in any direction, and then connecting where your footprints were to where your footprints are. That is the first dimension. It's a line. And it's a first dimension because it only requires one piece of information to describe the position of a point on the line. The hard part was just making the first dimension. Everything after that is just repeating the very first cognitive leap that we did. So first thing we did was take one step perpendicular to where we were in any direction. Now we're on a line. Do the same thing. Take a step perpendicular to where you are. So what this looks like is, if you can imagine math, drawing a perpendicular line. It looks like a T, all right, and it's 90-degree angle. So now we are, in order to make the second dimension, we are lining up many lines next to each other. Like if you can imagine all pencils lined up on a desk next to you, or if you look at your hand and you're humanoid and you put your fingers out flat, that makes a flat plane. It's two-dimensional. We're all familiar with the two-dimensional world. It's a piece of paper. It requires two pieces of information to describe where in any piece of, like the position of any piece of matter in the second dimension. Brief pause. All right, so we need an X and a Y. Then what is 90 degrees to the second dimension? This is easy because you live in it. You're very familiar with this dimension. It's the third dimension. If we take many flat sheets of paper and stack them up on top of each other, eventually we get a cube, and that's the third dimension. And we need three pieces of information, length, width, and height, to describe something in the third dimension. However, if you've listened to me give this explanation before, you will be familiar with this. What is perpendicular to the third dimension? It is much harder to imagine this. We can't just point to it. If I were in the room with you, I'd ask you to point to the fourth dimension. You couldn't do it. But you could point to a clock. That would be the closest thing. Because now we understand that you are not just a third-dimensional object. You're a third-dimensional object submerged within the fourth dimension, which is the flow of time. So the fourth dimension is like a river. It's a timeline. And one thing you'll understand about the process of building the higher dimensions is that there's a pattern. The pattern goes point, line, plane. The 0th dimension is a point. When you stack up many points, you get a line. When you stack up many lines, you get a plane. When you stack up many planes, you get a cube, and that cube could be imagined as the point, the starting point for the next line. So, one thing I can do for you in helping you to envision this is, envision if you're sitting in a room, your room is like a train car, and you're in the train car of 2:32 p.m. You were just occupying the train car of 2:31 p.m., and soon you'll be in the train car of 2:33 p.m. You're not moving with your feet. You are moving with your awareness through time. Very difficult, sophisticated understanding to be talking about here, because fish are not always aware of the clear medium within which they are submerged. The medium within which your consciousness is submerged is time. So you are not just on a timeline. This is the idea of fate. If you believe in fate, you believe that your future is written in stone, that the train car of 2:33 and the train car of 2:44 and the train car of next week are all already in existence, and that you are not in control and that you just move from train car to train car. Ah ha ha ha! I laugh. I laugh at that misunderstanding, because that's not accurate at all. The truth is that you are experiencing the present moment of now, and that present moment is like the surface of an ever-expanding bubble of consciousness. So the 5th dimension is a world of uncollapsed waveforms. When I spoke to you earlier about the sea of consciousness that we enter upon physical death, or upon dissolving of boundaries, and the way that we travel through the sun as a stargate, we are speaking about the world of uncollapsed waveforms. It is an abstract realm of pure possibilities and probabilities. Possibility means what can happen. Possibility means the likelihood of something happening. So in the graphic depiction of the timelines of your life, it's like, looking at it from the top down, it's a vortex, but we could see it as a bullseye or a target, where the path of least likelihood is at the center of the target, and that's what you're aiming for. That is the pathway of ascension, of reuniting your consciousness, which was diminished due to the diminishing of your genetic structure, realigning that consciousness with the source of consciousness. So you have been temporarily and artificially cut off from your connection to source. And most people think of that as, that's just normal. It's just normal to be born into a physical body and have a hacked operating system installed as your mind and be cut off from the source or God or hyperdimensional consciousness, and then have your whole entire life and then die. And only upon the moment of death do you reconnect to source, have a perspective, understand that you had a life mission. Like, that is not the way you're supposed to be acting. You're actually supposed to have your whole entire existence and be connected to source the whole time, like being a real-time broadcaster, as opposed to a recording device that takes an archive of your experience and gives that back to the source after the fact. How different is the experience? If I'm the source and I get a real-time broadcast from you, I can actually send feedback. I can actually change events as they are unfolding, because remember, the future is not set in stone. The future is an uncollapsed waveform, and consciousness is what determines what you will be experiencing. So let's use an analogy that we can sink our teeth into. If the 4th dimension is like a line, it's like a long, skinny French bread, and each slice of the bread is like a moment of your life. And science even uses this analogy and speaks about the bulk, the doughy part of the bread, as being the bulk, all right? I would like you to imagine the 5th dimension as being the bakery where the bread is made. So in the bakery, there's flour, there's water, there's yeast, there's ovens, there's the capacity to make dough. However, none of it actually exists yet. There's just the unexpressed capacity, all right? So when people speak about the fifth dimension and moving into the fifth dimension and fifth dimensional beings, I am not certain that their language is impeccable. Let's really figure out what we are talking about here. So the future is not set in stone. The future is an expanding set of possibilities and probabilities. So if you imagine you're on one timeline or set of train cars, however, you're in a train station where there are many parallel timelines, some of them going out to the left, some of them going out to the right, and they all have different pathways. So understanding that is beginning to understand the fifth dimension, because not only are all of the timelines lined up next to each other, but they change and shift over time themselves. So if we use the analogy of a river, we can say, last year the river flowed like this. This year the river flowed in a different pathway. Someone put a giant stone in the middle of the river and it had to redirect around the rock. And then 5 years from now, the river will be flowing like this. Being able to see the changes in the river is the fifth dimensional perspective. Understanding that the trajectory that you are on is not set in stone, and that the pathway that you're experiencing is literally being made with your consciousness. You are a co-creative partner in making that pathway. So I also use the analogy of ovens in front of your eyes. The world is actually a realm of dough that is not yet made into bread. And your perception, it's like having ovens in front of your eyes. And when you look around at this world of uncollapsed waveforms, as soon as you look at it, it turns into bread. As soon as you, with your perception, perceive the uncollapsed waveforms, they are collapsed into a physical reality that you can experience with your physical body. So the fourth dimension is like a line. The fifth dimension is like a flat plane made up of many lines, all right, that have changed over time. And the sixth dimension would be a cube made up of many stacked up planes of different versions of the fifth dimension. And if you can imagine, each time plane is like a tapestry, okay, like a flat piece of cloth. And if you stack up several flat pieces of cloth, you can run a needle and thread through them and sew events together. This is the beginning of understanding a higher dimensional perspective. Not only that you occupy timelines, but that those timelines change and shift, and that events can have repercussions across many timelines. This is really crucial. So I will give you some examples of this. You are living your lives concurrently. So what you are experiencing right now in this moment is an overlay of all of the other moments in your other existences where you are doing something similar. So if you're driving down the road listening to this on the radio, overlay that with every other life existence where you were either walking down a road or riding a bicycle or riding a horse or in some way moving down a road. Maybe someone was talking to you. Maybe a traveling companion was talking to you. Or maybe you were reading a book on a train. The idea that you were experiencing parallel overlays. That's one. Or if it could be anything, like if you were experiencing a car accident, in one life it's a car accident, in another life it's a train accident, in another life it's the overturning of your canoe. It's understanding that all of those events are like threads on different tapestries that are being sewn together with a thread that unites them across many planes. Here's another example. What happens with the nuclear and subatomic world, the realm of fission, doesn't just affect this timeline, it affects all of the timelines that are surrounding it and concurrent to it. So and this really matters because we're talking about the subatomic realm. The subatomic realm is a realm of pure possibility and probability. That's why there is an electron shell. We do not simply say, the electron lives here. We can't do that. All we can do is say, the electron lives in this neighborhood. It could be here, it could be here, it could be here. This is the probability shell within which this electron lives. So we're literally understanding that the abstraction of subatomic particles exists in a higher dimensional state. And when fission occurs, it is affecting that subatomic world and it's affecting other timelines. So when humans on Earth's surface in the 20th century began to experiment with nuclear weapons and creating nuclear explosions, those are events that have ripples and repercussions that are felt through many other layers of the fabric of reality. And of course, I only took this teaching, exposition, up to the level of the sixth dimension, which would be a cube created of many layers of time tapestry, the fifth dimension, that are constantly shifting. All right? That's only the sixth dimension. This cube goes back to the point, goes back to being one train car, because we can then imagine this cube as being the beginning of a new timeline or a new zeroth dimension. And let's put another cube in front of that cube, in front of that cube, in front of that cube. That's the seventh dimension. We make a line out of all of these sixth dimensional cubes. Now let's line up all of these lines next to each other. Wow, now we have an eighth dimension made up of time cubes that are embroidered tapestries of the fifth and sixth dimension. And now we have a tapestry that is made up of embroidered tapestries of the fifth and sixth dimension. So we have one layer of tapestry. Now let's slap another layer of tapestry on top of there, and another, and another, and another. Now we're up to the ninth dimension. All right? You can understand how this can be an infinite, fractal system of complexity that just continues ever onward. So we can really just understand that we are dealing with a certain segment of the dimensional space right now that we are defining, let's say, the 0th through the 10th or 11th dimensions. Okay, so how not to be taken advantage of by bullies on the playground. If some non-physical being taps you on the head telepathically and said, "Hi, I want to talk to you. I'm a hyperdimensional being and I'm from the sixth dimension." And if you ask them, well, what do you look like? And if they show you a picture of themselves that's like 2 eyes and a nose and a mouth, or 2 arms and 2 legs and 1 head, or anything that looks like an object that you are familiar with from the third dimensional reality around you, it is highly unlikely that you're actually talking with a sixth dimensional being. It is more likely that you're talking with someone that is an occupier of the interstices. So when you die, your ego is unmade. It's like the waterfall of consciousness is washing away your ego. There's a lot going on the surface of that waterfall. It's like you haven't actually gone through the meniscus. The meniscus is the surface tension of water, and it creates a lens. There's a thickening effect of the molecules of water, so it creates a lens effect. So, and this is very similar to the distinctions or the membranes between levels of density. So you're in this third dimension experiencing the fourth dimension of time, and you only get to get out by ascending through the tiny little wormhole. Everything else of this dimension has a boundary, and the boundary is the flowing membrane of death. And that flowing membrane is where a lot of consciousnesses get stuck. They occupy that membrane. There are consciousnesses that have been there. They're like the turds that refuse to be flushed. Do you understand? They're literally circling and circling and circling the bowl, but they won't actually go down the vortex. Beings have been turds circling the bowl for like eons, tens of thousands of years, and they've set up a whole economy there. This is talked about in my galactic history teachings. I call it the economy of hell. Yes, when we're talking about the interstices, we're talking about the realm of hell. Dimension between dimensions, occupied by lower dimensional, let's call them creeps. Beings that are service to self, and they do not have your best interests at heart. And really the reason why they are service to self is because they don't have a connection to source. They don't have an income. When you don't have an income, all you can do is steal from others, siphon energy off of others, and then be extremely penurious. Don't share, don't give to others, take, and then, use it all for yourself. That's their philosophy. And those beings, if you go into my galactic history teachings, have incepted the economy on Earth. And so if those values, the value system sounds familiar, it's because the beings that occupy the interstices and created the economy of hell then created a reflection in the physical realm of their own energetic economy. And this is what humans have been suffering under for so long, and this is also just about to change. So this interstice, this is the membrane that you can use the flying rainbow lasagna in order to get across, or in order to dissolve this boundary and reach a higher dimensional state. How does one flying rainbow lasagna? Like, let's do it as a verb. How do you do it? How do you employ the flying rainbow lasagna as a tool for consciousness in your own life and on a planetary level? So the first thing is understanding epigenetics. What rules the code? And the answer is thoughts and ideas and mental programming. The program of genetic fatalism removes choice from, it's like saying you don't get to turn the page on the book. You don't get to choose which page is being accessed by your RNA and, created into reality. Even being told the idea that epigenetics exists has an impact on the dance movements of your genes. Remember, your genes are constantly dancing. They are twisting, morphing, changing. Why is this going on? Because when your genes are supercoiled, they are full of potential energy, like a spring. In order to access the parts that are coiled up, some of the other aspects have to be cut and spliced, because otherwise it's too tightly coiled. So there are these amazing enzymatic messengers that cut and splice and relieve tension so that areas of the genetic book can be unfurled, so that they're not just coiled up tightly like a spring. So what determines these dance movements? So there are some aspects of your genetic code that are the chapter on how to grow a big cancerous tumor. And there's another chapter that is how to dismantle a cancerous tumor. How come in some people the how to grow pages are open, and in some people the how to dismantle pages are open? And the answer is mental programming. Fatalism is a program. When you look at pink ribbons, these pink ribbons, this nonsense about support breast cancer by wearing a pink ribbon, what is actually happening is a subtle mental program is being implanted in your consciousness about the origin of disease. So this has everything to do with the origin of disease and where it comes from, because disease is itself a mental program. So, one's genes are dancing in a pattern that up until this point has largely been dictated by what society teaches you, what religion teaches you, and you probably modeled your dance steps off of your primary caregivers, mommy and daddy and other family members. Nearsightedness is not in your genetic code. Nearsightedness is actually the expression, the symptom of the way one has used one's eyes and the cognitive dissonance created by becoming literate. Pre-literate societies do not have nearsightedness, even though they spend plenty of time looking at tiny objects very close to their eyes. It's not just using your eyes to look at things that are close to you. It is being asked to engage in the cognitive dissonance of reading words that go in a straight line across a page and trying to understand them as verbalized language. All right? This is crucial to understand. Nearsightedness is not genetic. If you took a child of two nearsighted people and raised it in a different environment, it probably wouldn't need glasses. This is huge. Get away from the genetic fatalism and understand that your genes are being influenced by everything and everyone around you. Dun 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 dun. I am here as the Flying Rainbow Lasagna to be a new influence, to offer for you and model for you a new dance step, a new dance movement called the Flying Rainbow Lasagna. So I spoke before about how your genes are supercoiled into the shape of a torus. When you take that torus and you put it into a higher dimensional state, you get a flying rainbow lasagna. So let's talk about how you place something in a higher dimensional state. If it's a flat piece of paper, we're familiar with this. This is a two-dimensional object. How do we make it three-dimensional? You fold it. You fold it, and then it achieves a higher dimensional state. All right? So if you take any object, like just imagine an orange, like a sphere, a ball, that object itself is a third-dimensional object. In order to put it into a higher dimensional state, you have to put it in a context. So when you place that object in a box, like in a room or in a universe, it then has a context. It is moving relevant to something else, and we can say we can either move it up and down relevant to its context, or we can keep the object in one place and we can move the context up and down relevant to the object. This is how you place something in a higher dimensional state. If you take the torus, the donut shape of your genes and your non-physical energy body, your electromagnetic field on a higher dimensional level, and you begin vibrating it in a higher dimensional space, what you get is the shape of the flying rainbow lasagna. And the effect on your genes is that you are now able to combine them in new and interesting patterns that you did not have access to before, because you were not able to cut and splice and twist and morph those particular pieces of information next to their critical partners. Your genes are like a book, and it's like saying we have a sentence on one page that says, to dismantle a tumor always, and then we couldn't combine the second half of that sentence that said, tell your cells to have apoptosis when they are no longer healthy. Apoptosis is programmed cell death. So these two this sentence, to dismantle a tumor, is the first part, and the second part is program apoptosis. If your genetic code, according to your parents and the dictates of society and religion and science as it has been taught to you, those concepts program your genes epigenetically to create disease, to create cancer. This is done very subtly. Whenever you go to the doctor and they take the family medical history, does father have cancer? Does mother have cancer? There's the implication that you will have cancer. So you need to purge and clear out those ideas. The Flying Rainbow Lasagna is a new idea. It literally says, if you can embody this shape, you can reformat your genes. Take all of the words of the book of your genes, cut them apart, and rearrange them into a new sentence. That is a sentence of health and vitality, of cellular regeneration as opposed to decrepitude. I've said this many times before. Your bodies were not designed to be healthy when you're a tiny child, gradually lose energy through entropy, and then become decrepit and then die. No, your bodies were designed to be cellularly regenerative so that you could live in a state of health and vitality connected to the source for your whole life, and your lifespan could last hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. So the idea of living only 100 years disconnected from source is beyond imagination. It is not an accurate assessment of what you were created for. Those are the dance steps that were taught to you by society and religion and mother and father and previous generations for a very long time. Now there is a new dance step that is available called the Flying Rainbow Lasagna. Here is how you do the Flying Rainbow Lasagna. The singularity that is at the center of the chakras is the same as the singularity that is at the center of every atom, at the center of each planet, at the center of each star. How do you do star travel like an expert? Not with a clank-clank metal spaceship. Clank-clank metal spaceships are easy to build and cheap to build. I am not impressed. You know what's hard to do? Cultivate your body and your spirit and your consciousness to the point where you can eat nothing but pure light, you create your own microenvironment, and you are able to link up with other consciousnesses through the network of stars and journey on wings of consciousness using unconditional love as your fuel. And basically, you do not have to have equipment. The network is there. You are a part of the network. Building something else is totally extraneous. It's like saying the most sophisticated person is the person who can live, in the woods without equipment. You don't need to have a propane stove. You can be like Milarepa, the saint, the mystic from the Far East hundreds of years ago, who, through pranic breathing techniques, was able to stay warm even though he lived in the high Himalayas. This is what the word Milarepa means. It means cotton wearer. He wore only a small cotton loincloth, even though he lived in the realm of the high Himalayas where he would have frozen to death. He learned how to cultivate his energy. And if you do some research into the beautiful story of this saint, eventually he ascended. He transcended the physical realm and went into a realm of pure abstraction. This is where we are all going. This is where our planet is going. Abstract entities from higher dimensions are indeed communicating to us and helping us on our journey, but please do not be fooled. Please do not misinterpret them. Please keep it accurate and understand that you are speaking with beings that are like made out of time tapestry. Thank you for being with me on this journey. Tune in next week. We'll continue to learn.